I think we're live. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this NSCA Women's Coach Educators live chat. My name is Erica Marshall. I'm the assistant women's soccer coach at Bryant University in Rhode Island. And we have a really exciting and hot topic of early recruiting to talk about today. So unfortunately, Courtney Sermons couldn't be with us today because she had a little knee surgery or a big knee surgery going on yesterday. So shout out to her. Hope she's recovering well. She kind of asked me to shout out to her. No, just kidding. But we hope she's doing all right. So to start things off, we're going to meet our two guests, Laura Jackson and Sarah Brady. And I'll give them the opportunity to share a little bit about themselves before we start chatting. So Laura, I'll toss it over to you.
Cool. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Laura Jackson. Currently the assistant soccer coach at the University of Idaho. Been there for 4 years now. So I just finished my 4th season. And I've been there ever since I graduated, ever since I stopped playing soccer. So that I've been coaching for about 4 or 5 years now, total, all at the University of Idaho. So, yeah. Sarah, you're on.
I'm on. Hiya, everyone. I'm Sarah Brady. I am the head coach in my first year at Iona College in New York City. I am a first-year head coach here, and I've been in the college game coaching for 3 years. Previous to that, I was always coaching in the youth game. I have about 10 years experience, 10 to 12 years experience at various levels of the youth game.
Awesome. Thank you both. So the topic we're going to be speaking about today is early recruiting and how it's becoming earlier and earlier. And excuse me, I think this is maybe, if not the most hot topic, maybe in college women's soccer, and I think in other sports as well. You know, some players, if you're not familiar, can be verbally committing to schools, you know, as early as 8th, making what most would say is the most significant decision of their life up until that point. And I would say majority of players, at least at the Division I level, will have made their verbal commitment to a school before even finishing their junior year. So it certainly is a very quick timeline, and I think it's created a lot of discussion amongst coaches at all levels. So one of the first questions we're going to throw out to our guest is why do you think recruiting is happening so early in the women's game? So first I'll let Sarah answer that one and throw it over to Laura.
Yeah, I think the early recruiting has started based on, you know, competition. People want to win. We're all competitive people as coaches, and, you know, the hunt of getting the edge, you know, if you can get that really, really good player before anyone else gets them, you know, that helps you win in theory. I think there's more dimensions to it than that. I think, you know, that's where it stemmed from. But I also think, you know, there's a fear factor with families. You know, if we don't go early, there's not scholarship money available. Club coaches, you know, they want to push their players to programs because it helps them sell their club, basically. I think it's a multifaceted issue. But I do think that it's being driven by fear more than anything, fear of missing out more than kind of the edge of getting ahead.
I mean, again, I agree with Sarah, definitely. There is, obviously, in the college game, there's an onus on winning. And, you know, whatever ways you can get that edge to try and win, I think with the recruiting process, if you find those gems, either diamonds in the rough or just the big fish, you want to go after them as soon as possible. But then I think you cause a chain reaction where, you know, you missed out on a kid because they signed to another school early. Next time, maybe you're trying to sign a kid early, and it just gets pushed back earlier and earlier. And I mean, there's positives and negatives, definitely, but I think, you know, it's just getting earlier and earlier. So.
Do you think the timeline has increased within, say, like the last 6 months or a year and a half? Do you find, like, you know, compared to 2 years ago, that things are getting faster, and like how much faster are they?
I think at the D1 level, even in the timeline that I've been coaching, when they changed the rules and you could start texting juniors and, you know, instead of just email, when back in the days when we could only do it once a week, I think that definitely sped things up, just because you could have more of a relationship with a recruit from, you know, their first day of their junior year pretty much. So I think even within the last 2-3 years, from what I've seen, I think it's sped up.
Yeah, I am inclined to agree. I mean, although I'm relatively new to college coaching, I have been involved in the youth system, and I remember I used to speak to college coaches about players, and it was, you know, typically they'd call me after the tournament, and we'd just, you know, we'd go through the tournament and you know, maybe check in once a month and see. However, now, you know, sat in the seat of a head coach, I feel like I'm speaking to coaches once a week, and there's not really much difference. You know, a kid trained well last week, she's also trained well this week. With anything that happens earlier, I think the relationship gets formed stronger. So, you know, we're interacting more, and that definitely speeds up the process.
Those are both great points. Thanks for adding them in there. So what do you think like are the benefits of recruiting early, and you know, what are they, if there are any, in your opinion? I'll throw this over to Laura to start.
I mean, with anything, I think there's obviously positives and negatives. I do think there are some positives to recruiting early. I think, again, like I mentioned, you can create that relationship with the player early, and I think they definitely appreciate that. You know, if you can show the commitment to them, you're communicating through their club coach from their freshman and sophomore years into, and then starting to contact them junior and senior year, you're showing that commitment to them. And I think, again, they appreciate that. But it really just depends where you're at. I mean, if you're at a big school where you have 3 recruiters, you hit your max, I think you can get out there and have these positive relationships with kids. But, you know, if you don't, if you only have 1 or 2, then, you know, it might be kind of a negative towards early recruiting because you can't get out and see them, to be honest.
Yeah, I think the perspective depends on what someone believes is a positive. So, you know, I've spoken to a lot of players who, when they commit, the first thing they say to me is, I'm so relieved this is all over. So, you know, they get to enjoy their last 2 years of school typically when they're typically being recruited. So, I mean, I don't think it's a positive to, you know, be recruiting so early, just philosophically, because I think players should be able to enjoy the game without eyes on them. You know, they should just be able to develop and become the player that they should become in line with their talent, rather than be accelerated based on, you know, we've had conversations with club coaches that have said to us, you know, you're looking for a centre back, you know, what you need from it, I'll coach you exactly that. So you kind of change in players sometimes, and they're not organically growing the way they otherwise would if we couldn't watch them. The biggest positive, I would say, from our school perspective, you know, we're a small private college in New York City. The early recruiting basically gives us a more realistic pool. You know, the early recruits usually go to the big schools, the Power 5 conferences, and then you can kind of make a more informed decision based on, that kid has gone to this school, this is more the fit for our kids from what we're looking for, of what's left. So you're not kind of, I don't mean the word wasting in a negative sense, I just mean you're not kind of following kids who you're never going to get. It's a little bit more of a realistic pool.
Thanks for your responses. I like the comment about giving the student athletes like a chance to grow and be more like process oriented, rather than mounting up the stress on their shoulders that, you know, the norm now is to commit early, and that's like the result that they're solely focused on maybe sometimes, rather than the process of just becoming a better soccer player and knowing that you'll end up where you're supposed to end up. So I think that's a great point. So the next one we're going to talk about is like what you think are the negatives maybe to recruiting females at such a young age. And we'll let Sarah respond to this one first. Go ahead, Sarah.
I think the biggest negative, I think that we'll all agree on, is the transfer rate. You know, student athletes are being recruited so young, they're committing so young. You know, I can speak personally based on my experience here at Iona. I have players who were recruited by a coach that never coached them. You know, coaching is pretty fluid. In the college game, coaches move on to different programs. It's very evident. Players are recruiting so early that sometimes they're not taking in the entire decision-making process. They just like the coach. You know, relationships are huge, as we mentioned earlier. We're speaking to these kids from 14, 15, 16 through club coaches or directly if they call us. And, you know, people do get attracted to people. But that's a little transient in the college game. As I say, there's a lot of movement with players and with coaches. So I think if we slowed it down and we didn't allow kind of recruiting conversations to happen directly until later, I think, you know, the young person they're gonna think more about the bigger picture of the decision. So, you know, when I can speak again from when I was younger, when I was 14, 15, if I was being recruited at that point, I was only thinking about football. You know, as I got to about 16, you know, school became a little bit more important in a decision of where I was going to play. And then older than 16, it was things like, where am I going to live? Where is my education going to lead to? You know, what type of job am I going to do? So if we kind of take our foot off the accelerator, and allow these young people to grow, not just as players, but just as people, and really figure out and form, you know, their own identity, I think we're going to get a more well-rounded recruit once they actually get to campus.
Yeah, I mean, for me, there are definite negatives on both the coaches and the players' side. I think first and foremost, physical attributes. You know, you're recruiting a player at 14, 15 years old. What are they going to look like at 18? And some of that ends up being guesswork. So you're expecting a player to come in and be a centre-back. You want a big centre-back. You're sometimes maybe hoping that she's going to grow. And when she doesn't, that puts that pressure back on her, like she's not good enough. And I think that's one of the biggest negatives. Aside from that, I think just the sports psychology of it. If you are committing at 14 or 15 again, like Sarah said, you might actually be stunting that player's progression and that growth, because, you know, finally they have that onus off their back. They have that pressure off their back. Are they really going to put everything into still developing as a soccer player, or have they basically settled into, oh, I've committed now, you know, my job is done, you know, all of my club that I've done before this, now I can focus, you know, I can go and play college. But are they really going to push themselves to be the best player that they can be if they, again, don't have a little bit of pressure? And then lastly, I think at 15 years old, at 14 years old, do you know what you want from college? Do you know what kind of school you want? Do you want a big school? Do you want a small school? I don't think that you think about those things when you're that age. And those things become very important, because what happens if you get hurt? What happens if you're not on the team anymore? Are you going to be happy at that school? And you might not know that at 14 and 15. So I think that, again, adds to the transfer rate. I think you muted yourself.
Whoopsie. Sorry about that, everyone. I would have talked for like 3 more minutes with no one even knowing. Read my lips. Yeah, I was going to thank you for your responses, and then just ask, you know, in your opinion, your experiences, have you found with some of the early commitments that these kids are being forced, or like being given offers with timelines, or have you found more that maybe the kids are the ones who are like pushing the coaching staffs to make their commitment? Like, how do you feel in your experiences about those two options?
Who's going first?
Go ahead, Sarah.
You're up, Sarah.
I can speak from both sides of my experience. So going back to my club coaching, you know, I was very heavily involved club coaching 3 years ago, 4 years ago, in speaking with college coaches, and the pressure was definitely coming from the college coaches for the kids to commit. However, now I can honestly say, in my experience as a head coach and an assistant coach, it's the kids heavily who are pushing for early commitments, and more so their actual club coaches. So I think, although it may have started with coaches trying to get ahead, you know, making sure they got the best recruits in, I really believe that it's flipped now, which is the scariest thing. I think families, I think clubs, you know, they want their kids to be committed. I think there's various reasons why, but I can honestly say that we all control our own recruiting process as coaches, and I'm very, very firm on, we don't tend to give people a hard deadline. For example, what we'll say to a player, and I'll give you an example of a conversation we recently had. You know, we want our 2018 class done by this date. Does that date fit in your timeline of decision? And if they say yes, we say great. If we say no, if they say no, you know, I wanted longer than that, what we typically say to them is, look, we can allow you to go longer, but the offer may change based on other people saying yes, saying no, etc. But we always like to do that early in the recruiting conversation, just so that we can be on the same page with deadlines. But, you know, that deadline is pretty much measured in months and not weeks. I have spoken to a lot of players who have said, you know, they've been told you've got 24 hours to commit, there's the offer. So I think it just depends on your staff and what your philosophy is. We're definitely not people who push people to commit because, you know, I think you said it earlier, Erica, this is the most important decision of a young person's life. So I think the decision should firmly fall with them when they think it's the best time for them to make it.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, in my experience, most of the time, I think that the pressure has definitely come from the college coaches, just because of the game that I call it a game, because the game that we play in recruiting. You know, you're looking for a kid and you want to pull the trigger on them. You want them to commit to you. And if they're unsure, I mean, obviously you don't force them into coming to your school or whatever it may be, but then maybe you have to move on to the next kid. And that's where it comes down to, maybe your offer will change. I think that both players and club coaches are getting a little more educated when it comes to the recruiting process. So they're not jumping into the first opportunity they get. They're not jumping into the first offer. They're spreading it out a little bit more and seeing what kind of offers they can get, which somewhat can slow down the recruiting process. But I think most of the time, again, in my experience, I've seen it come from the college coaches more than anybody else.
I think a lot of good stuff. I think I like what you mentioned, Sarah, that we all ultimately control the recruiting process, whether you're a player or a coach. And I think that's like a really important point to remember, because I feel oftentimes as a player, you can think, oh man, that college coach is deciding when I commit and where I commit. But sometimes you have some leverage on either side. It's just about timelines, maybe matching up, like you mentioned. So the next question I want to discuss is, do you expect this recruiting process in college women's soccer to slow down at any time? If so, when? Just what your thoughts are maybe on that one. And we'll start with Laura on this one.
I mean, I don't think so. I don't think that it's going to get ridiculous and get earlier and earlier and earlier where we're starting to recruit 11-year-olds. I mean, maybe some programs do that, but I don't think it's going to go that far. I think the biggest thing is, again, a testament to how women's soccer has become a bigger sport in society, how we have more fans. The pressure is on winning, and however we can do that, I think, you know, coaches are going to keep pushing this recruiting deadline. I think that it's going to be very hard to put rules on that. You know, I think that the NCAA is obviously trying to do so that you can take a little bit of pressure off the players. You can make it more of a better experience for everybody. But it's going to be tough, you know, if you start putting rules on you know, coaches, you can't give out verbal commitments and that kind of thing. I think then it goes into the circus of going through the club coaches and, you know, we're making a commitment. Are we really making a commitment? And I think it's going to be tough. Again, I don't think it's going to get too early, but it's going to continue to get pushed a little bit more.
Yeah, fully agree with Laura's statements. I think the Pandora's box is already opened. I think it's much harder to pull something back than kind of restrict it in the first place. I think, you know, 8th, 9th grade, it's not going to get much lower than that, but I do think that will be more of an emphasis than it is now in the coming years. And again, I think it's very, very difficult to manage this situation. I mean, I go back to every coach has their own recruiting philosophy. You know, we're all very hard-working people, and we're all entitled to recruit morally the way that we feel is the best for our philosophy and our program. I can only control what I believe is the right way to do it. And again, you can't really criticize other people. You know, the bigger schools have to do what the bigger schools have to do to be able to be performing in their job along with their philosophy and their morals. So we can't really judge each other on this. We just have to be okay with the way we're navigating the process.
Thank you for your responses. I'm going to throw one more at you guys. Who do you feel, with recruiting moving earlier, who do you feel it's affected more, the players or the coaches? Like, who it's impacted? Like in your opinion, of course, I don't think there's like the perfect answer to this, but from your experiences so far, because of course, you know, we each coach at a university. We've maybe coached at other universities along the way, but we haven't coached everywhere at the other 300 and it's going to be 335 Division I schools in 2018, and there are, you know, over 1,000 if you go Division I, II, III, and NAIA. So, in your experiences, like, who maybe is it impacted more, like, or more negatively, the players or the coaching staffs when we're maybe committing kids that won't even ever touch the field with some of the kids that are on your current team that they visit school to meet?
Yeah.
Whoever wants to take a stab at it.
I think, in my opinion, I think that it's definitely affecting the players. As a recruiter, that's just something that you do on a daily basis, whether it's a senior, whether it's a junior, whether it's a sophomore. I think that that's our job. And obviously you have to modify that a little bit to stay within the rules. You have to, the way that you address the players and, you know, the timelines, again, that you're talking about. But I think definitely it affects the players more. You know, the way that we organize youth soccer now is more serious, you know, from a younger age, because it's like, okay, we're preparing you. Do you want to play college soccer? And, you know, if we're moving back in this timeline, you're starting to ask earlier and earlier, do you want to play soccer in college? And at that age, it's like, well, I'm just playing for fun. So, you know, I think that it's then putting, for those girls, I mean, again, I think we've talked a little bit about the bigger schools and how you're trying to get those big players into the bigger programs, the more successful programs early. But the same thing goes for, you know, the diamonds in the rough. You know, if you're a mid-major school, you're going out to tournaments and you see someone that you like and they're younger, then you're going to go after them, and maybe you want to do that before anybody else sees it. But again, that pressure's being put on the players, and I mean, I'll be interested to see where it goes, because I think, again, we're getting more serious about soccer earlier and earlier. So we'll see how it affects the next generation. I think the next generation, the next 4 to 8 years, you're really going to see that effect of those players that are now coming in. How are they? You know, are they tactically as good? You know, maybe they're technically better because maybe they've been focusing on this a little bit longer. But you'll definitely see the change here in the next 4 to 8 years, I think.
Yeah, I think it's affected everybody, and even people that you wouldn't necessarily think so. So the early recruiting, I mean, the avalanche falls on the players. Philosophically, I don't think we should be looking at really young players. You know, sophomores maybe identify, but, you know, not really reach out. Again, this is just my opinion. But younger than that, I do feel like you're not looking at the fully formed player that you're going to actually end up coaching in your program. But administrators are affected, schools on the wider scale are affected, you know, things like transfer rates, APRs, families are affected. I mean, I often speak to people at recruiting events and on recruiting panels, and they say we just can't afford it, but we feel like we're, you know, holding our son, daughter back from an opportunity if we don't put all of this money into getting them the right opportunities. So it's very, very global. But because we work in the NCAA, you know, there's a huge mission to protect the student athlete, and they do a wonderful job of that, you know, with many of the rules. However, I do feel like the early recruiting kind of is somewhat in conflict with the mission to protect the student athlete welfare and all-round experience, really.
Thank you for that. I guess in closing, like, would you mind giving us your final thoughts, and also maybe if there are any like parents or even club coaches who work directly with youth players or youth players watching, or like what advice might you give to them, because of course all us college coaches know the whole recruiting scene. Like, what advice would you maybe give to players who are being recruited, club coaches, and also just your final thoughts on the topic of early recruiting? And we'll go with you first, Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing for me is that there's many paths that that lead to Rome. All roads lead to Rome, and there's many ways to be recruited, and there's many different options out there. I mean, I feel like I speak to a lot of recruits who have got a very closed mindset where I'm going to go on this route and that's it, and there's no other route for me. And then sometimes it ends up working out. The majority of the time they fall off that path, and then unfortunately, end up with no options that they feel are a good fit for them. So I would encourage people to be very relationship centered, speak to people, demand honesty in the process, be very informed as much as you can. If that's not asking the coach directly, read up on the rules. I'm always a big believer in the more you know, the better your decision can be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be too cliche and say, go out and enjoy your youth soccer experience, but I think that first and foremost, I think it needs to be your decision about the college process. Do you enjoy playing soccer? And if you do want to play at the next level, then I think it's definitely about education. Again, the college coach that you talk to could change. So for me, it's definitely, what kind of school do you want to look for? And I think that's tough at 14, 15. I think getting in the conversation with coaches and your club coach as a sophomore is a good idea, just because you're educating yourself. But I don't think you should put pressure to make any final decisions unless you really feel like it's the right one. Again, you're making one of the biggest decisions of your life, and you're making it years before you even go to that school. I think, again, education and trusting yourself, and again, talking to your parents, talking to college coaches, to the college coaches and your club coaches to find out what you really want.
Yeah, I mean, if I could just add a little extra comment on there, I've worked with some fantastic club coaches who really, they genuinely want the young player to go where is the best fit for them. I think surrounding yourself with trust would be my biggest piece of advice to a parent, a player, and a club. There is some clubs out there who are just, as much about the sell. They want the name of the school on their website, and that happens. It's everyone's going to do it their own way. But there is some absolutely wonderful clubs, and I can speak on that through experience. I mean, there's some local clubs around us in the New York, New Jersey area. There's a genuine care about the process and finding the right fit, all-round fit, academically, athletically, socially. And then that also fits the family's budget, etc. So surrounding yourself with trust, I think, is a really valuable piece of advice for people in the recruiting process.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you both. Want to send a thank you out to those of you that are viewing on behalf of the NSCA, and remind you of our next Women's Coach Educator Hangout, which will be held on February 15th, and we'll be talking about coaching in the grassroots, and like, what are the areas that you must cover as a coach at the youth level, how competitive should it be, and how do we get more quality coaches involved. We'll have Sam Snow along with guest Dina Weintraub, staffer, as well as Lisa Cole, who's the national team coach of Papua New Guinea. So two incredible people. So you're not going to want to miss out on that one. And just a big thank you to Lauren Jackson and Sarah Brady on their insight in early recruiting, like probably a hot topic that the both of them and every other college coach out there could talk about for days. And I don't think it's necessarily going away anytime soon. So this discussion will continue to evolve. So thank you to everyone, and we hope you have a great day.
Thank you.